Hi, my name is Andreas Wittmer. I'm the Director of Entrepreneurship Programs at the new School of Business and Economics of the Catholic University of America here in Washington, D.C. I have the distinct pleasure to introducing to you our next speaker, Francis Russell Hittinger. He holds the Warren Chair of Catholic Studies at the University of Tulsa and is currently visiting ordinary professor here at the Catholic University of America. Dr. Hittinger has the unique distinction of being one of only two people in the world appointed to multiple pontifical academies. In his case, the Pontifical Academy of St. Thomas Aquinas and the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. My friend Michael Novak said recently of Dr. Hittinger that he didn't know anyone other than Russell Hittinger who knew all the details about Catholic social thought or had read all the encyclicals of the last 300 years. We'll now have the honor to hear his thoughts about the main theological and philosophical challenges of living the vocation of business.
First, let me express my gratitude to the School of Business and to the Knapp Institute for bringing us all together, and to Cardinal Turkson for his, he calls it brief and humble, but very thorough coverage of the fundamentals. The title of my talk, What are the main theological and philosophical challenges to living the vocation of business, has at least a faint odor of presumption. Academics too often presume to give advice to clergy and to businessmen, it seems to me. In any case, the talk suggests a very big and sprawling lecture. I will do no such thing. I think that the first task of philosophy is to clearly describe and to reflect on things we already know. In this case, what we already know about our action. And I hope by the end of this talk, I don't say anything you don't already know. But let me begin with a scenario. Imagine a super smart machine programmed with the seemingly harmless and ethically neutral goal of getting as many paper clips as possible. First, it collects them, and then realizing it could get more clips if it were smarter. It tries to improve its own algorithm to maximize its own computing powers and collecting utilities, unrestrained except by external circumstances. Its power grows by leaps and bounds until it will do anything to reach this goal. Collect paper clips, yes, but also buy paper clips, steal paper clips, perhaps transform all of the earth into a paper clip factory. If it succeeded, overcoming all competing powers, things essential to human flourishing will have been irretrievably lost. Actually, this is not my scenario. It comes from Nick Bostrom, who's the director of the Oxford Program on the Impacts of Future Technology. He worries that such an intelligence would have instrumental reasons for stubbornly and very smartly pursuing open-ended acquisition. Indeed, it maximizes and innovates, but to the detriment of human flourishing. And Bostrom's question is whether such machines can be made human-friendly. We don't know the answer to this question. But the scenario does help us to reflect on something we do already know, namely that this machine is practically stupid because it doesn't know how to act. First, it cannot rank ends. Second, it cannot make prudential judgments about means. And third, most importantly, it cannot include the perfection of a human person in either the good ends or the good means. Indeed, if human life became like a super-duper paper-clip collecting intelligence, human beings would be slaves. Now, swap out for this machine, collecting paper clips, the definition of Homo economicus learned every semester by college undergraduates. begin with the so-called rationality principle. Individuals in the aggregate maximize welfare as they conceive it, namely as profits and utilities. They are constrained by time, resources, imperfect calculating capacities, and so forth. But on the whole, they want more rather than less. And their intelligence is devoted to prevailing in the face of external circumstances, which are primarily viewed and estimated according to risks and advantages. Now, to be sure, it's only a model for predicting outcomes. And many, if not most, economists will insist it does not realistically describe any particular human person's intentions. Economists will also point out that in the aggregate, irrational as well as rational expectations can be coordinated in a market, thus rendering the Homo economicus model of rational choice somewhat shaky, at least with regard to predictions. But whatever the advantages or disadvantages of this model, all of us know it's a very incomplete understanding of human action. So if we take the usual vocations, a common sense description usually will be much more concrete than an abstract model of an open-ended maximization of profits and utilities. Married people, for example, make love, procreate, nurture and educate their children, and give to one another acts of fidelity. Clergy, vocation, preach, console, and perform sacramental actions. Scholars teach, research, and write. And even the economists do not claim to maximize in some open-ended way, but to analyze and to understand. Physicians diagnose, heal, and comfort. We describe vocations ordinarily in terms of very concrete sorts of actions or ensembles of actions and transactions that belong to the vocation. But, and here's the challenge, I suppose, the vocation of business persons is typically wounded by a self-description that it's all about, or mainly about, open-ended profits and utilities. And we know that's not so, but that is often the description. And we should not be surprised that according to a recent survey that was reported in Monday's Wall Street Journal, more than half of the U.S. public says that strong and influential corporations are bad, even if, and maybe this is the key trouble, even if they promote innovation and growth. Only 36% believe they're a source of hope. In other words, many ordinary people are not in doubt about business enterprises maximizing and innovating, but apparently they're skeptical about the human scale of the ends and the actions. A few decades ago, Michael Novak underscored the importance of human action as the matrix of business, to look at the acting person. And more recently, our colleague Sam Gregg has done the same, and many others in this audience. I think the Catholic social doctrine, especially in the magisterial documents since John Paul II, really do emphasize the intrinsic value of human action, howsoever it's located within the scheme of division of labor. And this is the best place to start in describing the vocation of business. Social doctrine will not help us immediately to solve problems of public relations for business people, nor can it provide abstract mathematical models for predicting economic outcomes. It can, however, provide some assistance in helping us to see more clearly and to better describe the things we already know about our on-the-ground action when we act. And here, perhaps 3 bullet points. First, in economic enterprise, actions are more important than things. It's easy to focus too much on the thing being produced or exchanged or distributed or tallied up as profit. One reason it's easy to focus too much on the thing is familiar to anyone. When we are engaged in work, making paper clips, writing speeches about paper clips, it's quite natural to be chiefly aware of the product or the outcome of our action. When I was typing this talk, I was not chiefly aware of myself thinking. I was aware of getting the thoughts onto digital image. The excellence of our own action and the excellences of other agents remain implicit. We know them, but they stay in the background, so to speak, until we get the job done. But when we work, our focal interest is given to a product of one kind or another. Another reason is colored by our own culture and time. Utilitarianism is our last standing public philosophy. All of us think this way to some extent. We intend and expect to be rewarded and to reward others, chiefly in terms of external outcomes. That we are actually perfected in doing so is often left out of the picture. Third, in our political and legal culture, we are reticent to claim intrinsic moral value for any kind of action or policy, apart from a social cost-benefit account. That is, our disagreement about what human excellence is and our fear of merely making subjective claims incline us to only look at external outcomes. But we cannot remain for long unaware and unreflective about our action as having a certain priority to the things and the external circumstances. I think this is crucial for the dignity of business, because there is no vocation more deeply immersed in external things and outcomes. I don't think we could find a vocation that's more complexly and deeply immersed in such things, but it's also deeply immersed in actions and transactions, and perhaps more than any other vocation. Think of the actions, and I won't even give a complete list: to produce, to exchange, to distribute, to consume, to plan, to save, to invest, to produce, to exchange, and so forth. The ensemble of actions that go into ordinary business is awesome. Think, too, of the ways that our actions depend upon the concurrent actions of other agents to achieve their intended results. It's not just the actions, it's all the transactions that are going on. As I said, Catholic social doctrine does not pretend to predict or to directly shape economic outcomes just as such. Rather, it begins at the beginning, to the thing we already know. Made unto the image and likeness of God, the human person is an intelligent master of his own acts, and in so doing, he's provident for himself and others. Being provident is first in action. Business embodies a rich ensemble of actions, and this vocation is misrepresented, or to paraphrase G.W. Bush, it is misunderestimated if we talk only about the outcomes rather than the rich and varied ecosystems of actions and transactions. Second, the principle that goes along with this, actions over things, is in some sense, in justice, the priority of relations over things. Aristotle remarked, "It is by doing the acts that we do in our transactions with other men that we become just or unjust." This is not a mere moralism. It's something we already know. Justice is not a thing but a relation, and it's a tripartite relation. Unless and until we can align three factors, justice cannot be done. And the three factors are always these: who owes, who is obligated to give, to whom it is owed, and what is owed. If we only know one or even two, we cannot do justice. Justice requires a relation or a right alignment. Who owes, who gets, and what is given. And this triadic relationship culminates in an act. Someone, an individual, a firm, a social group, gives what is due to the other. And only in this way is it perfective of justice. Of course, if a needy child gets medicine, well, that's perfective of the child. But in the order of justice, it's the giving that perfects the acts of whoever is obligated to give. Just getting everything around into the right hands may be a good thing, it's not a bad thing, but it's not justice. Justice is an action. And it's not just maximization, it's right relation. It's not more of it, it's the right one. And in a sense, it's not competition either, because it's a judgment about how things are aligned. What is mine, what is thine, what is ours? It's sometimes very simple and sometimes very complicated, because to align these three factors depends upon discerning what we actually owe within the circumstances and complications of various kinds of societies, the family, the nation, the firm, the local neighborhood, all kinds of perplexities of time. What do we owe over the short versus the long or very long term? We need to know what's to be accomplished by an individual or a collective action, and all of this within the context of different political and economic systems. It can be very complex. No business person gets to decide all of the circumstances, nor does any business person get to decide all of the legal and moral rules for this activity. But we do get to decide how to treat people within our competence and role. In the firm, employees, customers, the neighborhood. And in fact, even though there are mountains of laws, speaking of mountains of paper clips, there's mountains of laws regulating business. By and large, the law leaves many judgments and actions indeterminate. That is, these actions should be determined by the ingenuity and proactive stance of the players on the ground. Passive obedience to the law is not enough. No entrepreneur would ever think that the path to a good business is simply complying with the law. Rather, he or she would actively discover new ways to identify authentic human needs and ways to meet them in ways that are profitable. So too in justice, the vocation of business is not only to produce, but to use its ingenuity to improve the relations of justice. For example, and it's only an example, justice is always situated, it's never anonymous and abstract. Whatever good sense might be made of the hidden hand of the market, the virtue of justice is an intentional human act in view of what is actually owed to other persons, whether employees, investors, or the neighborhood. And this does raise a pressing problem, probably more for business today than other vocations. Who is my neighbor? And globalization sorely tests our ingenuity on this score. It creates a perplexity. Are our employees anonymous, or are they our colleagues? Are they our neighbors? Can businessmen, using their own ingenuity and not just relying upon the government, solve the neighbor versus profit problem that's posed by globalization? That will truly test the mettle of the business vocation, and I don't know how the problem could ever be solved without that ingenuity. Lastly, I want to say subsidiarity is often confused with devolution or lowest efficient level. But subsidiarity doesn't pertain just to the efficient level, but to the proper level. And in the moral scheme of things, what is most proper to oneself or to another person is action. Parents in raising a family, that's an action. Legislators in making laws for the commons. Apostolic authority in teaching, sanctifying, and governing the church. Those are actions. When you talk about proper level, we're talking about actions that belong to a certain person or sphere of persons. Ordinarily, for example, the parents are the first teachers of one's mother tongue. And ordinarily, this is a very efficient way for language to be communicated and learned because it's based so deeply on proximity and affection. It's a good way to teach and learn a language. But this principle does not depend on the claim of efficiency. Get in a car and drive across the country and make sure to stop through the state I live in, and you will grasp rather easily, listening to how people speak, that learning the language from your parents is not the most efficient way to speak PBS English. Yet it would be wrong to subvert or destroy this most fundamental transaction, parents teaching, children learning. It's an ensemble of actions that actually constitutes a community. So too, the matrimonial vocation. It's not merely reproducing efficiently, but rather procreating matrimonially. That's what belongs to married people. That is the most efficient way of getting new human life. Who knows? But it's the matrimonial way to do it. Those are the kind of actions that belong to married people. So the principle of subsidiarity brings us back once again to the value of human action, to respect the dignity of human action in our various vocations. Last thought. In 2 generations' time, we've witnessed the collapse of almost all of the modern utopianisms, political, social, economic, and religious. What all of these utopianisms had in common is the belief that human perfection is really an aggregate state of affairs that happens willy-nilly behind the backs of the actions of real human agents. This is why the worst of the utopianisms actually declared war on individual and communal action by giving absolute and unilateral power to the state, others to the market. This is a denial, more or less explicit, that man is made unto the image and likeness of God, is the master of his own acts, and is provident for himself and others. And it seems to me that the vocation of business is at the center of a post-utopianism world. Not because it's the most important institution. To understand the value of business is to understand it's not the most important institution. The 3 great institutions of human happiness, man is matrimonial, marriage and family, man is political, and man is an ecclesial animal. Those are the 3 great institutions that are necessary naturally or supernaturally for our happiness. Rather, I say that business is at the center, because business, properly understood, touches upon and perfects actions that course through all of the other institutions. Matrimony does not course through politics. Matrimony does not course through my department of philosophy and religion. We don't have to have matrimonial relations to be a department of philosophy. Okay. But business courses through them all. In that sense, to use a Thomistic term, extensively, it's at the very center. So getting these things right and having a proper self-description of the vocation of business is no minor matter for 20th century humanity. And in saying this, I hope I don't tell you anything you don't already know. Thank you.